do a nice simple seascape today. I've got some colours squirted out here. I'm just going to mix up some washes. So I'm putting half a teaspoon of water into 3 wells. And get my round number 10. My first colour is raw sienna. So I'm going to take a good pea-sized blob in, so that's nicely mixed. And I'm going to classic beach colours today, so I'm going cerulean blue, nice sunny beach. And then I've got rose madder, so a good pea-sized blob, any sort of rose colour. And that's in ready. The other colour that I've got here is Payne's Grey. So let's get some water on the sky, plenty of water. I've done about a third split, so I've got a third sky. It makes a good composition to have a third sky. I've got a little bit of distant land. It's always nice to have that in there. Plenty of water on there. And then just checking my round number 10's nice and clean. Drying that off and in with the cerulean blue. So I'm just moving that around. Nice circular motion. I'm not going for a totally flat sky, but I don't want it to be cloudy either. Plenty of cerulean blue wisping around here. And I'll brush a little rinse off. I'm just going to dab into the permanent rose. Oh, sorry, rose madder actually. Sometimes use permanent rose, but today rose madder. So I'm just sweeping a little bit of that in. I like to have a bit of interest in the sky and it not to be totally one colour. Rinse my brush off. I'm just dabbing into a tiny bit of the grey. I'm just going to dab that into the palette there and take a tiny bit of that rose in. So I've got a dark rose colour. I'm just going to bring a bit more of that just towards the top. So it's a little bit darker. Just want a bit more interest in the sky really. Not so much cloud, more haze. If it's not blending well, then just bring in a little bit more blue. So the cerulean blue is a semi-opaque colour and it tends to sit a little bit more and not flow with the transparent. So you can just blend it in a little bit more. I don't want it to look too stripy. So I'm just going to get that blend. Just really want to just play around with okay. I'm then going to come down onto the beach, let that dry and sort of settle in a little bit. So I've got a water's edge coming to here and I'm coming in to the beach area, which is this bottom right hand corner. So water on there. Then I'm going to pop in with the raw sienna. So I'm stroking that across at a diagonal with my round number 10 still. I'm coming over this corner area, which I'm going to make into sort of grasses, maybe a few wildflowers. I dab a little bit again into that rose madder, This is just going to give it a little bit more warmth. So just sweep that through again in a diagonal. And rinse that brush off and dry it off, and we'll come down to a number 6 now. I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit of the Payne's Grey. So I have got some water on the brush. I'm going into the neat Payne's Grey, but I'm going to dab that off quite a lot. What I want to do is get a really nice edge on the water's edge. So to do it, it gives you that really nice shadow. So where I can see the tip of the brush, I can see where I'm going. So I'm just going to follow this line down. That's going to give me a really nice shadow. If you pop more shadow where it's closer to you, that will give you a better sense of perspective. You can also, with your round number 10, just sweep some of that shadow horizontally. This is going to give you a nice surface on the beach. So I'm touching into that grey but sweeping horizontally. It sort of helps connect everything together, connect that surface together. It's a really handy trick. My brush is dry, it's not soaking wet, I'm not adding water, I'm just sweeping through. Now if I dab into some of the neat raw sienna and neat cerulean blue, I'm mixing on the paper and making a bit of a greeny colour just for this corner. I want the colour to stay neat. It's still wet in this corner, but the neat colour won't go too far. So I've done that big area with my round number 10, and then I'm going to go smaller with a number 6, and I'm just going to twizzle around a little bit just so I can get to this corner easier. So dabbing into the blue, dabbing into the raw sienna, and I'm going to sweep down. So I'm going to sort of create some grassier foliage bits. The sweeping down action is just much easier to achieve than the sweeping up, so that's why I twizzle round. Just keep dabbing in both paints. You can swap down to a rigger, which is a long thin brush. This is a number 2 rigger. That will really give you some long thin grasses here. It's really nice to get that in when it's soft. You go in different directions. You don't want it to look freshly mown. Different heights, you want it to look random. Dab into a little bit more of each and bring that through at the bottom. If you dab into a little of the Payne's Grey, you can bring some of that through at the bottom to darken that corner as well. And rinse that off and then twizzle back round. So that's got a lovely base for the beach now. So I'm going to start to come into the water, I think. I'm just about dry enough. And I want to leave some areas of white. So around where the waves are, I'm going to leave it drier. So I'm just dabbing on little bits of water, and I'm going to work quite quickly. So I'm out of cerulean blue, so I'm just going to quickly mix some more of that up. I'm going to come in with the blue. It's quite nice if you can leave an odd glimmer of white on that horizon line, because it does really stand out as the sunlight shining. You bring these down, and then you want a bubbly edge. So just that sort of dabbing motion here just above where that I've drawn that line of the wave, and then we can just bring the blue underneath. That's created that first sort of breaking wave as it's coming in. I'm doing the same here. So the trick is to leave about 1 to half a centimetre above where you've drawn your lines for your waves. And then you're doing that bobbly action. And then you can just bring that line underneath. It doesn't have to be too precise. It's just enough to show as white. Then you often get a little bit right at the water's edge as well, unless it's very, very gradual. So we're just going to pop a little bit in there. So the trick really is to get the right amount of water. That means you've got enough time to get round this and get that on. So I'm going straight into a little bit of the rose madder. So I want the same colours that I've had in the sky. So I can just quickly reflect those in. And you can also just take in a tiny bit of the raw sienna. If you just dab it in at the front, you just get this sort of look of the sand being churned up on that final wave coming in, which works quite nicely. If you get any watermarks, you just want a nearly dry brush and you're just going to run them along. Just still take a tiny bit of the paint off. It does sort of happen when you're doing this, and watermarks tend to work quite nicely in water. They don't work so great in the sky, but they work quite well in water. So I'm just going to take a tiny bit of the Payne's grey in. So I've loaded my brush with water, I've dabbed into the Payne's grey, and I'm dabbing a fair amount of it off. What I want to do now is just accentuate these bobbly bits. So I'm bringing a little bit of that grey just over in places. It's helpful if it's still wet, but it's not the end of the world if it isn't, because I'll show you what to do. Sometimes these things dry quicker than you anticipate, and you'll just be able to soften it in. Softening in is a wonderful thing once you get used to it. So just popping a little bit in there. There is a little bit of dryness there, so I'm just getting a damp brush, taking some of the water off, just touching that paint and wetting further than it needs to go, just so that that's spreading in a little bit. If you're really clever with your planning, you can do a wave all the way across, do one and then wet that area, or do that one, then do the next wave. It's just that I've gone with smaller waves here, so I've had to do it in one foul swoop. I'm going to take a little bit in here. It's also a chance at this point to change any of the lines, because the grey is a lot darker, it will cover. So if you want to make the lines a bit more bubbly, you can do that with the grey. As it goes further away, get less grey in there, because you're seeing less of it in a distance. Then you can just soften it again with a damp brush. So I'm just touching the paint. It's also quite nice to do a little bit on the underside of the wave. So if I do a little bit here, it just accentuates it a little bit more. All of these tiny little bits help to accentuate those waves. just softening in with a damp brush. With the grey, you can also go further than the crashing wave, and that helps to connect it all together. So I'm just loading my brush with a little bit more grey, and if I come out here, out here, out here, you get a bit more of a connection. It sort of connects to the rest of the sea, as waves do. I'm just softening those in a little bit. And then you can also, I'm just going to twizzle a little bit because it makes it easier for me to get the line in. Pop in some ripples. So this grey, I've just got water on the brush and not much grey. I'm just pulling this through, I'm light pressure. You can vary the pressure. Put heavier pressure on, you get a bigger line. And as you're going towards the back, this is just a damp brush again, just softening in that bottom edge. As you go towards the back, you want to get it more and more horizontal, so it looks like it's going away into the distance. You can do a little wiggle. So again, these light little grey ripples. There's hardly any Payne's grey on my brush now, but there's enough for it to just show a light shadow. So I've got this distant land in here as well, so I'm going to make that nice and dark. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the raw sienna on, so a little bit of water. I'm doing this with my number 6, a little bit of the raw sienna, and I'm going to come in with some nice strong Payne's grey. So that's really going to accentuate that. All the way to the end. And there's a little bit of light there, again that works really well. I'm just going to leave that. With a loaded brush, and a loaded clean brush, I'm going to dab into the cerulean blue, and these areas are a little bit too white, so I'm dabbing lightly through with a little bit of watered down cerulean blue as shadow. So you've just got a little, very light bit of shadow on here. Okay. This is nearly dried. I'm just going to dry it off before I come on to do the final tweaks. So that's nicely dry now, and I've twizzled upside down because I'm just going to work into this section and get some nice sort of foreground grasses happening. I always find it easier to just do this upside down, and it is personal preference. So I've got my round number 10, I'm dabbing into the raw sienna, then dabbing into the cerulean blue. I'm just going to sweep on. So I'm creating another layer of what we did earlier to build this up, but it's on to dry now. So it's going to start to build up a little bit of depth. So as you go on, if you think it looks too yellow, then you take a bit more blue in the next mix. Mixing on the paper gives you much more vibrancy, and I tend to like that. In fact, I should do a technique video about mixing on the paper and mixing in the palette for you, because that would be a really interesting one. I'm going to swap down to a number 6 and do the same. In fact, I'm going to take just a bit of cerulean blue in here, just so I start to build this up differently. Do not be afraid to come over this area. It'll give a nice sense of depth. The temptation to keep everything in a neat area just everything that overlaps gives a sense of distance and depth. So it's always worth considering that when you're doing a picture. Take a little bit of grey onto your brush, into the mix as well. The darks are really important, as well as keep preserving the white in watercolour. Those little bits of dark, if you haven't got them, there's always something missing from the picture. So I'm just taking on some bits of Payne's grey into here now. Again, it's just adding a little bit of depth into that corner. I'm going to twizzle around. So we're back round the right way. You can just sweep, so random sweeps of the brush just create leaves. You don't want them to be too precise. You can add a few more. Sometimes you turn it around and think, oh, actually I need a few more there. Just going to do a few with the rigger, just so they're nicely fine. So I'm mixing some raw sienna with a tiny bit of cerulean blue that's left, and then adding some of the Payne's grey in. So I've basically got a mucky yellowy grey here. I'm just going to take through and over with some fine strokes. I could have done this upside down, it would have been easier, but I've twizzled back round now. Just needs that extra little bit of depth. It's made quite a natural looking mucky green actually. Different directions, different angles. Just breaking through that colour that's there. We're just really building up this section. Then just think about what you can utilise. So I'm thinking foxgloves here. And I've got a little bit of foil that I've scrunched up into a foxglove shape. When you come on with the brush, what always happens is you end up with the same dotty effect. So finding something that works in a different way, that's going to be random, and everything that's random, I'm just going to add a little bit more paint in here, I want it to be a bit thicker. Anything that's random, there's a risk of it going wrong. But random works a lot better than doing it with a brush. So we work with what we get. So I'm dabbing the foil into the paint and I'm just going to pop these marks on. So it's a bit like the sponging. The kitchen cupboard's great. These are going to become foxgloves. So get some within the foliage as well. Then I can just dab in. I'm going to continue to use the rigger because it helps with the randomness. I'm going to dab in with a little bit of water just to change some of the shape of some of them. Some of them I'm just going to leave as they are. What you need to make sure is every one of them has got some sort of stem. You don't want a floating flower head. Some can be bigger, some can be smaller, some can be tiny specks. That's just dabbing in little bits of water. The other tool that's quite useful is a cotton bud. I don't know if they're called cotton buds everywhere in the world, but here they're called cotton buds. I'm going to use a little bit of the blue. Just dab in to create some additional, in fact I'll use this multicolour because that one's not appearing, some additional foliage. It's all about creating a little effect of random. So this can be overlapped, you can dot it on several times in the same area. It can just be isolation on its own. So it's giving an effect of randomness unless you go dot, 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 dot and create a pattern, which you're not going to do. We're creating the randomness by overlapping it. In fact, it looks a little bit now like honesty. You could even make it into teasels. Okay, so the last thing that I want to do is just to give a bit of shadow on the beach. So I've not long done a video about the technique of glazing, which is overlapping layers to give boldness or additional colour. And what I'm going to do here is just glaze in. So this is a fairly watery mix of raw sienna. And I'm going to glaze in just below the water's edge. I'm not going to do it all the way along there because that's still wet, but just to there. And it already looks like there's some shadow appearing, but you can still see those colours underneath, so it's giving it additional depth even though it's the same colour. And then I can just bring in some horizontal strokes from that line that I've just done to give it a sense of wet, shadowed beach. So that's just by using a glaze over that area. Okay, so that's all done. Hope you've enjoyed it.